everybody, welcome to a very special episode of Avalon, episode 20. I've mentioned this in the last few episodes, but we have finally built out the downtown area. It's been a slow-moving project, so to all of you who've made it 20 episodes in so far, thank you for your patience. I know this is, like I said, a very slow-moving project, but I can assure you that these next few episodes will certainly satisfy those of you who are looking for some more expansion, looking for some faster development. We have really a couple different parts ahead of us, a couple different stages in this expansion. This episode is going to be focused entirely on developing the grid, kind of creating something that facilitates the public transit, that facilitates good traffic flow within this grid, and also looks nice as, you know, a total infrastructure layout. I want to have, you know, an interesting grid that's pretty dynamic, but that also has a lot of similarly spaced grid blocks so that we can have some kind of template building styles built out in the future. I'll talk about that more a little bit later on. But for now, we're going to dive into that stuff. But more importantly, I spent a long time trying to figure out how to format this episode, to be honest. I actually delayed this a week, so if you didn't see an episode last week, that's why. I didn't know how to record myself adding a bunch of, you know, metro lines and things. It didn't seem like something that'd be that much fun. Essentially, I'm gonna cut out all the footage of me like putting down all these lines, because honestly, even after the stream, I had to go back and change a bunch of things. It was kind of a learning experience because I found out a lot of things about the Metro Overhaul mod. I didn't understand how you have to connect the depots. There's some very specific ways that you need to connect depots. They need to have access to very specific parts of the line, or else you can't actually feed metro trains into your lines, and they'll just glitch out and show like 0 vehicles no matter what. So it took a bit of practice. Beyond that, I had to actually totally revamp the downtown Central Station metro system, because we only had 2 lines on each side, or 2, you know, line connections on each side. And we had like up to 3 or 4 lines all using the same stations in a couple different stretches. And I kind of imagined that would be fine, but in practice, it was not fine. We had way too many vehicles, like giant traffic jams of metro cars, and that's like not good at all. I want to have it so that we have 0 waiting and cars are always flowing. So what I did is I went back, I redesigned it, and the purpose of this episode will be to kind of show off and sort of do an overview of the entire city's transit situation right now. Obviously, it's not done. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do in terms of bus routes, or, you know, expanding some of the elevated metros, but what I wanted to do is get some metro lines working and moving, because we are getting some traffic issues. It's not very heavy, but these are going to be more essential as we start expanding the city outwards, because we're going to have a lot of residential that's trying to get to the commercial in the downtown area. And if we don't have metro lines, we're going to have ridiculous traffic coming back into the city. Before I get into the metro lines and the kind of final result of what happened this episode, I want to first talk about the plan going forward. I've talked about it a little bit in the last few episodes, but I've really solidified now the phases that I want to go through in the next maybe 4 or 5 episodes, so that we can actually expand the city outward. The first phase is this one. This is where we lay out the grid. So the grid is now done. I talked about this in my live stream, but beyond just the grid itself, I want to have all of the metro lines laid out as well, all of the underground and above ground stuff before we start building. It was honestly a nightmare to try and work in the downtown area and add metro lines. There's just so many conflicting objects and props, and it was super annoying. So I'm not going to make that mistake again. I'm going to flesh out the actual lines and the routes themselves before we start building. I thought that just having the stations would be enough, but that was not the case at all. So we're going to do the grid and the metro lines and the metro stations, even on the grid itself outside of the city. All that happens this episode. Then the next episode, we're going to do some really big highway infrastructure expansion. So I've got a lot of plans for new highways. I'm going to show you here basically the site of the biggest highway interchange is going to come in here. This is going to be probably the centerpiece of the entire city. It's right outside the downtown area. We're going to have connection points from the existing highway coming out of the downtown area, the 2 lower highways you can see on the screen now, kind of in the curve there. We're going to have a third highway that branches to the right if you're looking at the city towards our big circular interchange. And then finally, we're going to have a fourth connection which comes in from a new highway that's going to be branching into all of our grids on the left-hand side there. So these grids are going to be very important for bringing in traffic from the highway onto, you know, all these residential buildings. It's going to be very, very dense, and it's going to be a really big population boom. So I want to make sure that all these separate areas have their own highway connections, and we're not feeding traffic through the downtown area to get to these sections. So these two connections will be very important. The main highway, you know, centerpiece interchange will be very important. It's going to be not only, you know, what, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-way interchange, but we're also going to have enough room underneath it to still fit roads and still fit some above ground metro lines. So all of these roads are actually starting out, I think, like 20 game units high or something, and then going upwards from there. So it's going to be a very tall interchange, but since it's surrounded by buildings, it should look pretty natural and it shouldn't look too odd. The final piece then, once we get all this interchange stuff done, will be to add a new sort of rail yard, railway slash metro connection point. We have a smaller one, obviously, in the downtown area, and this one will serve as sort of, it's just like the central station that we built in like the 4th episode. That'll serve as you know, a way to get to a lot of our metro lines, but I want to have a much bigger hub for all of our incoming trains that is responsible for not only taking trains in or people out of the city, but through the rest of the map as well. So this one needs to be much bigger than just a 2-platform station. That'll probably be in its own episode after the infrastructure highway episode. From there, this is when we get into some of the fun stuff. So before we throw in any buildings, we have to do all of the, you know, above ground, but still not like crazy high, like our 30-meter high you know, railway right now, but we're gonna have a above ground network of metros as well. So that'll come in just before we start building, and I want to kind of plan out where those need to go as well. That'll be all across the grid, so you'll see that probably in an episode bundled in with the building. So this would be probably phase 3, where we do the above ground metros and then the building. So you might wonder, how are we gonna fill this whole grid? Like, it's been what, 20 episodes, and we've got, I don't know, maybe 15 to 20 blocks done, and we just added like 40 or 50 new blocks. So I've talked about this a lot, but the point of this city will be to emphasize a lot on the areas that get a lot of attention, and then we need to bring in some contrast, bring in some kind of, I don't want to say filler, but that's kind of what it is, you know, bring in some large, expansive urban expansion, really, on the outsides of more detailed areas. And that kind of lets you focus more on these very big detailed areas, and it also really complements them when you have these bigger expansions of, you know, lower level buildings that are more like, you know, 5 or 6 story apartment buildings or things of that nature. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to build out some templates. You might notice now that as I've been designing this whole grid, I've been making every single block pretty much the same dimensions. It's like a rectangular 2-to-1 ratio rectangle. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to build out probably 5 to 6 templates of just residential high density buildings. They're going to have lots of variety in them and probably be, you know, relatively detailed. I'll probably add maybe at max like 50 to 100 props per template. So again, not too heavy. I'll probably design some buildings in the editor to make sure that we can actually stay under that prop limit as much as possible. But once we have those templates done, then all we got to do is copy in random fashions and plop down and really fill out this whole grid with a whole bunch of expansive high density residential. Once that's done, then I'll come back and I'll delete some buildings in certain corners and key areas, and we'll add some you know, some personality to the grid. So we'll have like some commercial buildings popping up on corners where we delete buildings and plop stuff there. Maybe we'll have some business districts and things like that, but we'll add some variety so that in the end it still looks like a very custom tailored grid system, even though we haven't spent 20 episodes, or more like 40 if we actually did this like we did the first 20, building it out. So that's the plan. I hope that wasn't too much talking. I tried to toss in some cinematics and whatnot, but how about we now go into the final result of our transit and metro situation, and you guys can kind of see what we're working with here going forward. So at a glance, this looks pretty chaotic, and I mean, it kind of is. Like I said, I spent a lot of time revamping this thing and trying different things, lots of trial and error to find the lines and the orientations that would not only get the most people riding the metros, but also that would prevent clogging in the tunnels. That was one of the bigger challenges. So you can see we have a big fat stack of 6 different tunnels going through the downtown area, a couple of them sharing lines, but most of them having their own line. So that really helps. I mean, at this point, there aren't any cars that are waiting. They're all just smoothly running through, which means that nobody's sitting around waiting at the stops. And you can actually see, even though we have around 1,500 people riding right now, which is pretty high for our population, there's not a whole lot of people waiting. They're getting picked up very quickly. There's no backing up behind the stations. So really the number of vehicles and the number of tunnels is working very well in this system. In terms of like the design of the actual layout, I wanted to point one thing out. You can notice that we have the elevated lines, which I haven't really talked about. They're the light orange ones kind of sprawling and pronging out into the left grid there. These elevated lines, they still need to be connected to a metro depot, so I can't put any lines on them yet, but there will be lines on those. So if it seems like there's a bit of a light dispersion on the left-hand side there, those will be covering that area. And I just need to wait until we have a good opportunity to actually connect that to a depot. I don't want to have like a super steep metro, you know, rail, because it's like 30 meters above the ground, so, or 30 game units, whatever that actually is. So yeah, we definitely need to have a nice place to put a metro depot, and we'll figure that out later on. But for now anyway, the system works really well. We have a pretty good variety of different types of lines. Like I said, the looping one there, the red looping one, which is a clockwise, counterclockwise loop, does a pretty good job of getting people from the left-hand side grid to the downtown area. Same with the yellow line. The orange line is a nice way to kind of traverse the outside of the whole city. We'll almost certainly have to add more lines that come from these lines alone out to further parts of the city, but I kind of want to also integrate the elevated metros, because they're kind of, you can see they're all moving outwards away from the city towards future parts of the city. So I want to integrate those as slightly more long distance lines that kind of reach away from this kind of more I don't know, confined, I guess, part of the metro network. And then, like I said earlier in this episode, we're also going to have a big like rail yard kind of rail connection that's going to have a lot more platforms, and that one will also give access to other parts of the city as well. So lots of plans for the future, but this little self-contained network should do its job pretty well, and it should let us to expand the city out the way we want to and really bump our population in the next few episodes. So that's it. I'll leave you with some shots of the whole lines kind of working, and you can kind of see where things are going. But hopefully this was a nice little overview of the metro situation. I know that a lot of you guys have been asking for some transit updates, so here's sort of an overview of the transit lines and how the transit stuff is working in Avalon. Obviously, we're gonna have to come back and do buses and do the elevated metros and expand the metro system more and add the rail yard, all of those other components of the mass transit. That'll all come in the next few episodes, or a little further on from there. And we'll address them when they come, but hopefully another video kind of like this. So let me know down below if you like this format. I know this is kind of different. I didn't really do as much time-lapse building because there really was just a lot of trial and error more than anything, but I thought it was kind of fun. I liked getting to show off everything, and I think that this was a little bit easier to kind of follow than my usual content. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this one, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.